This is Jessica Taylor interviewing Lynn Rhodes on June 15th, 2013 at 4:00 p.m. Can you please state your full name, including your middle?
Lynn N. Rhodes.
N?
N.
Okay.
I was born here and grew up in the courthouse, and then we moved just out of town past Dominion. And I resided there until I went away to school in the 7th grade. And then I lived in South Carolina for a few years, and then I came back here. Been here ever since.
Okay.
Being born in 1948.
1948. And when specifically did you move back from South Carolina?
76.
76. So you were gone for how many years?
Oh, went away to school, and I was here for the summers.
Oh, okay. Where did you go to school?
Miller School.
Miller's?
Miller School, outside of Charlottesville.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to use all of that, on you?
Well, it's there. It's on there forever. So what are your parents' names and occupations?
My father's name was G. Sinclair Rhodes, and he owned the Gloucester Men's Shop. And then he was third generation sheriff here in the county.
Wow.
And my mother's name was Merwin, M-E-R-W-Y-N, G. Rhodes, and she was a teacher here for many years.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, what school did you teach at?
She taught at Body Type, and then she taught at T.C. Walker, and then at Page School.
Okay. Do you have any siblings?
I have one older brother, George.
Okay.
You may have met.
Not yet, but how many years separate you two?
He was born in January of 47. I was born in February of 48. So, a year.
Okay.
Just barely.
And as for you, what is or was your occupation?
I was a stock helper with Dominion, worked in the storeroom, and I ended up on the paid rescue squad here. Mm-hmm.
Where is that located?
Right up the street.
Okay.
On the right.
And where is Gloucester Men's Shop located?
It was a 2-story green building down just a little further on the left. It's it has weaving supplies, bolts of cloth and weaving material and stuff.
Just up here?
Yeah, it's right beside the Arts on Main. Then it's what used to be the barber shop, and then the 2-story building.
Okay.
With my dad's dry cleaning plant.
Oh, okay. So pretty much the entire time you've been in Gloucester, you've been on Main Street.
Yeah.
Where specifically did your family reside?
Well, when they moved from the courthouse, they resided off of Fiddler's Green Road, Gloucester.
Okay. So relatively nearby?
Yeah, it's what, half mile up there. No, it's actually a mile from Gloucester Men's Shop.
Okay. So you've definitely lived in this area the entire time.
Yeah.
So what's your earliest memory of Main Street?
Well, years ago they had angle parking on both sides. And it was a real circus to watch people back out adjacent to each other, and you just know they're going to hit in the middle. Now, that was the only road through town. And the convoys would come through town, and they would go on forever and ever, it seemed like, when you're a little kid. And they would, I don't know if they did it on purpose or not, but they ended up backfiring real loud. But see, they had reserve tanks. If you cut one tank off, it starts backfiring, and then they'd cut the other tank on, I believe. Mm-hmm. And you see a little kid walking down the street, they wanted to make sure it backfired. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. So, did your family come to this gas station often? No.
No. Well, he dealt primarily with the ones right next to him, because there were 2 gas stations right next to him, and he had his own gas pump in the back.
Wow.
So
Which one was that? Which gas station was it at that time?
it was a Ford gas station right next to him. I think it was Amical Gas, and then there was a Dodge place this side of that.
Okay. So that's where he would have gone because it's the closest.
Yeah. The Ford place had a parts department, which all the parts for cars and other things were pretty standard back then. And even parts for some of the dry cleaning equipment, the guy would write the number down, said, don't tell anybody, but go next door. You can get the same bearing from them a whole lot cheaper than you can get through the company.
Wow. That's some loyalty right there, actually.
Yeah.
Wow.
And at the top of the steps was a switch, like a light switch, and it blew the siren. For the fires, there was a fire siren behind the firehouse and one behind the old movie theater, which was where the bowling alley is. There used to be president of the fire company. And of course, there was a couple of places in town that you would call to report a fire. And they'd go up there and blow the siren. And if the fire was in the courthouse, you'd blow it 3 times. Of course, you had no other way of communicating. And you could actually hear that siren in Bellamy, where I lived for a while as an adult. On a clear day, the wind would carry the sound over there. And then somebody would telephone the firehouse and tell them where the fire was. And you wrote it down on the chalkboard. Didn't have all the modern communications back then. Even when I joined the fire company, we were still riding on the back of the trucks to and from fires. And long coats and hip boots and helmets. Yeah.
So you're coming at it from the perspective of the fire company. What sort of, I guess, technology, how has it changed over time there?
Everybody has a monitor. And you get fire tones or rescue tones or both. And it's got a repeater button on it. So if you don't hear it the first time, hit the button and it repeats it. And it gives you very clear instructions.
Okay.
And the house numbers have helped so much. And everybody has a book with all your house numbers, streets, names, and everything.
Okay. What kind of fire trucks were they driving at first when you first remember it?
Old ones.
Okay.
Sometimes they would have an old oil truck that they use for a tanker. But you keep in mind, water is heavier than oil, so you had to, is that right? Water is heavier than oil? Oil sinks to the bottom. Anyway, whatever. We still always had some pretty decent equipment there.
Yeah.
I wasn't around when they had the hose reels they would run down the road with and hook up to the fire hydrants.
Okay.
And years ago, they had a bunch of these solar-operated fire extinguishers. And Happy Morgan was a pharmacist at Morgan's drugstore when I was up the street. And he loaded the car up with them to go to a house fire one time. When he rounded a curve, they all fell over and discharged in the backseat of his car.
Oh, wow. So where did the fire station get its gas?
Mostly in my day, it was out back out of the tank, Texaco.
Texaco. So it would have, you might have ordered it through this gas station.
Well, Captain Brown owned the Texaco station.
Right.
And Andy James was a fire chief for many years. And he operated the place down there, and they supplied the company with fuel.
Right. Makes sense. It's a small world.
Yeah.
Okay. So even though you didn't come, oh, you were going to say something?
Well, back in the 50s, you know, daffodils was a money crop. And it had trailways and Greyhound buses going through here twice a day on each side of the street. And you could book a bus anywhere in the country. And you could catch a bus to Richmond. You could walk a block and get on the other. Because normally they didn't both go to the same little towns. And they shipped a gang of daffodils out of here in the belly of the buses. And that was a cash crop back years ago.
Mm-hmm. That's a good memory.
Yeah. They'd pay school kids 2 or 3 cents a bunch to pick them. I never picked them though, but.
When you were in school, did you have a car?
No. We actually, going through elementary school up here, Mom started teaching again in the 4th grade, and we rode with her. And then we got older, we could ride the bicycle. And it was it's funny, there was an old wooden gymnasium out there near where the gym is now up here. And I can remember them giving out polio shots.
Wow.
And it was Dr. Tab, the old doctor that was across the street from the firehouse, and that big house, had a little office out back. And Raymond Brown, Dr. Brown, had just come here. Mm-hmm. And the old wooden gym had a balcony on both sides, and it had a coal-fired furnace. Mm-hmm. The reason I know that is my dad had borrowed coal once in a blue moon from them. But that's where we first got our polio shots.
Wow.
And nobody knew, and people did come down with polio.
Yeah.
We had played with a cousin in Goochland during the weekend, and the first of the week they called and said their daughter had come down with polio. And of course everybody was scared to death. And if I recall correctly, we were put on Geritol, liquid nasty Geritol, 3 times a day. And for the luck of God, we never got it. My brother and I never got polio.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So, I'm not sure how to transition from polio to cars.
Cars were basically 2 tones. They went from either blue or black, with red cars being on the East Coast. And then they went to basically 2 tone. And when my dad was sheriffing, he could pick up a young man and park on 17, and he could tell you the make and model of the car, probably the year, and who was driving it.
Wow.
They just didn't change. The styles stayed pretty much the same.
Uh-huh.
And you can't do that now.
Yeah. So what make and model did your family have?
I know we had an old 2-door coupe at one time, and Pop had some panel trucks in the business, and we had some Chevrolets over the years. Mm-hmm. We finally had an automatic car. Mm-hmm. I learned to drive with a shift, 3-speed on the column and the clutch. Mm-hmm. And when I went away to school, some of the boys couldn't drive anything but automatic. Mm-hmm. And then the air conditioners started creeping into the county. Cars with air conditioning. Mm-hmm. Most places didn't have it.
Yeah. You didn't go to high school here. You went to high school in Charlottesville.
Yes.
When you were in Charlottesville, did you happen to notice who got cars first? Did you notice that some of the high school kids got them at 16 and then other kids got it at 18? Or
Well, some of them could borrow cars on weekends. And of course, eventually they would work during the summer and buy one themselves. But they couldn't have any on the hill where we went to school. By Joe, we utilized them on weekends if you had a friend that had one.
so where would you go if you had a friend that had one?
Well, we rode around Main Street doing what most guys like to do.
Which is what?
We were always looking for girls. And there was a little bit of involved.
How old were you when this was happening? You gonna tell me like 12,
No, I wasn't.
13,
15, 16.
15, 16? Okay. So at the age when you would be learning how to drive anyway.
Yeah.
Who taught you how to drive?
Well, I learned pretty much on my own up there in the woods, in and out the garage, around the circle, up and down. And I never had a learner's permit. We came down the street and took the driving test, and then you had to do parallel parking. And the hardest thing was when you went down Main Street, it's not the way, because I wasn't used to driving on anything that wide.
Makes sense. So in your time on Main Street here, who did you notice coming in and out of this particular service station?
Good question. I don't have a lot of recollection.
Okay.
Not going to school here from the 7th grade on.
Right.
Didn't know a lot of the guys unless I'd been in school with them.
Yeah.
And you had no reason to come this far down the street. Because they eventually had the grocery store over there, and Colonia store moved up here. But we used to go to the old movie theater over here that had the columns in the front, and all fascinated with all the bottle caps on the ground instead of rocks.
Oh.
The old carbon arc machines.
Oh. Wow.
And a lot of the movies were still black and white in those years.
What was the first movie you saw in the movie theater? Is that hard?
Yeah, we had been known to go to the drive-in down the road.
Where's that?
You know where Ace Hardware is? Off Old 17, before you get there on the right. And of course you had separate sides too. You follow me? Okay. And I was actually old enough to date and go down there, so or some mosquitoes would pick you dry.
Well, that's a good place you could take girls on dates.
Yeah.
Okay. And you would have been in college or summers of high school?
Summers.
Summers?
Of high school. And it used to, before you had a driver's license, the skating ring down here was the place to go on Friday night. And if you had a girl you could skate around next to her, you were doing something.
That's wonderful. Someone else was telling me about sock hops. Was that after your time or before your time?
Well, I had always heard of them.
You heard of them, but not your thing?
No, they had one dance. You know where the doctor's office is right up here the other side of the ABC store? They had a dance upstairs there. And I went to it.
Yeah?
Did a lot of looking.
Okay, so to be safe, I'm gonna focus on the gas station for a second. If you were looking at it from the outside when you were in elementary school before you left in the 50s, how does it look different than what it looks like right now?
No gas pumps.
Okay, you got me on that one. How about the colors?
The colors are pretty original.
Okay.
And of course, you've heard about the island they added on out there, and the roof got knocked off.
Right.
And you heard about the bathrooms that were on the side.
Well, tell me about that.
They had like a screen porch And if I recollect correctly, there was 2 bathrooms in there. And back then, people traveled, and it was nothing to pull over on the side of the road and have a picnic lunch. There weren't any Burger Kings, McDonald's, or anything. And there were places on the side of Old 17 and other routes that had regular pull-offs and picnic tables. And this must have been an ace in the hole for people, because you got the bathrooms right there and a screened-in porch, so you could sit at a picnic table out there and eat.
Did the other gas stations have that?
No.
No.
No. I think they had drink machines on this side at one time. There might even still be a little cement pad out there.
Oh, do you remember what kind of drinks it was? Was it Coke? Was it Pepsi?
Well, we bottled the Cokes here, so I'm sure they had Cokes and probably knee-highs or something.
Okay, all right.
Probably had one of those grape sodas.
Okay.
Ginger ale, maybe. The golden ginger ale.
I didn't even know that existed.
Well, I never drank too many nickel Cokes. And they used to pick us up. Somebody would walk us over to the Dards, Chrysler Dards, and hold you up, and you had to shove the door up, and you could pull out the small bottles.
Wow.
Cokes for a nickel. And then there was a salesman that would walk us down to Morgan's drugstore when it was up there and buy a milkshake, a big, tall milkshake for $0.25.
Wow.
And they would split it in half for my brother and I. Of course, you had to get permission from my mother to do that.
Right.
And that was tall cotton. The first time when they were building the house up there, a salesman came up there and we were playing out in the yard, and he asked, can I give the boys a peppermint stick? And that's when they came in little boxes. And Mom said, sure, but they probably won't know what it is. And we thanked them and ran out and dug in the sand pile with them. We didn't get candy or Cokes growing up. Very rarely did we ever get a piece of gum. When we came through Richmond, there was 2 big department stores, Tall Hammers and Lynn Rhodes, and one of them had the old traditional parking garage where they'd park the cars and came squealing as they go up, the tires squealing. They had these bubblegum machines, and they get us some look like chiclets out of there. And by God, you had to dispose of that in a napkin or something. They wouldn't let you spit it out anyway.
So how many times a week did you end up at the drugstore?
That was far and few between back then.
Yeah.
Now, they did have a peanut machine, hot roasted peanuts with a turntable. And I watched older people go through there and just get a handful and go down there chunking them. And it turned out they didn't sell as many as they wanted to because people ate a handful free every day.
So did the gas stations have these kind of amenities that the drugstores had? No.
They had some bottled drinks and maybe some cakes.
Cakes?
Little sweet cakes.
Like shipped in from somewhere or
Yeah.
made by somebody?
Shipped in.
Oh.
And Notice bread was one of the most well-known breads in that time. And you could find them in just about every store, every country store, every big store. And they sold a little loaf of bread. And of course, when people worked construction jobs, you could go in there and get this little cake of bread and a couple slices of bologna and a couple slices of the hoop cheese for practically nothing back then. Mm-hmm. And some of them swear that little loaf of bread was still warm from cooking when it got here.
That's a nice thought.
You know, the sawdust floors and back when they had the butcher shop, had sawdust floors. And the old wooden butcher blocks in the middle. And they would cut the meat up. And when you got lunch meats, they sliced it off of a loaf of lunch meat. And they always had a label on the bottom. And when my brother and I got older, we'd make each other lunch rather than eat what they had at the cafeteria. And it started by accident. The one that got the bottom slice had the label in it. You start eating that and you're chewing on something that won't chew good. So then it got to be a sport to put that in.
So where was the meat from?
Martin's J's Martin and Company, and that was between the existing SunTrust Bank and the antique store. It was a 2-story building, and it had a narrow wing on the right, and it had hardware. And on the left side, it had your groceries, and there were steps that went upstairs, and there were some piece goods. And Olin Mills would come up and set up a studio up there. Had 2 rooms on the right, waiting room, and they had a speaker system where you'd speak into the system and put the money in what looked like a juice can. And you'd talk to them downstairs and tell them how much you rang up and send the money downstairs, and they'd put the right change in it and send it back up. And when my dad was younger, as a young man, he worked for Mr. Martin, and he lived in the back upstairs.
Wow. Was that common for an employee to live in the same building?
Probably not, but the opportunity was there. Mm-hmm. And he and I think the other man that lives down where Nick is still alive.
What would be his name?
Oh, you would have to ask me. It might come to me. But anyway.
Well, I'll try something else. How many times a year did you go to Richmond, those big department stores?
Well, there was a time when my dad would go up there about every couple of weeks to pick up supplies for the dry cleaning.
Wow.
And sometimes Mom and my brother and I would go with them. And of course, they dropped one boy and Mom off, and a lot of times I rode with Dad to go to the factories to pick up some supplies. Or I know Hanes Underwear was one place they would go and pick up things. Mm-hmm.
What's the point of taking kids with you on an errand like that?
No babysitters.
Well,
You don't need a babysitter, and we were out of diapers and potty trained.
fair enough. What about Newport News and Williamsburg, places like that?
There was a time when you had to go to Hilton Village to a veterinarian, and we did ride that ferry on occasion. And the thing that impressed me was the pollens that were all in a bundle, and they brushed up against it and they rolled back and forth. And the last day the ferry ran, when the bridge opened, Benny Lee, that lives right down the road here, was down there in his cowboy uniform, hat and shirt and pants and guns. The wind blew his hat in the water. That was very traumatic.
Wow. Well, the bridge did change what's accessible, right? Did you find that after it was built, it was immediately used a lot more?
They had no choice. The ferry quit running.
That's true.
And people always commuted to work, even though they had tickets, but the average person had to pay 75 cents each way. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, a lot of houses were built off of that. You could buy the ticket for, I don't know whether it was 30 or 45 cents or something. And occasionally you had somebody that would swap a ticket. You know, everybody was going through there giving you $1. And you'd give them the change, a quarterback. And then when you rung it up, you rung up a ticket. And they put a ticket in the drawer and pocket the rest. And that was just it wasn't all of them that worked down there did that, of course, but it was one or two of them that worked down there. And when a house only cost $4,000 or $5,000 to build, and the amount of traffic across there, you can see it wouldn't take too many years to save enough money to build it.
Yeah. Wow. So in that sense, you do lose some enterprises when you bring in technological innovation, right?
Yeah. Now, people still run the tolls. Mm-hmm. There was something in the paper, and it was more than I would have anticipated.
Interesting.
that still run the tolls.
That's odd. So in the courthouse area, do you move by foot or by car most often?
Now?
Then.
Oh, well, it was nothing to walk down the street.
Yeah.
When we were old enough, they'd allow us to either walk or ride a bicycle down the street. And it wasn't anything as taking you down the street just because you wanted to go down the street. That was unheard of. Mom went down the street basically once a week on Saturdays to buy groceries. And then we'd go to church. If you needed milk or bread, Pop brought it home because there was a store across the street.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it wasn't no such thing as joyriding for us back then.
Yeah. So your grandparents' generation, I know that's but did they have cars?
Well, Granddaddy was sheriff.
Right.
And when they rationed gas and stuff during the war or tires,
Yeah.
he said, that's all right, I can jack the car up and stay home. And they got him tires.
Wow.
And there was a gas pump sitting on the other side of the court green on the other side. There was a gas pump just inside the wall where he'd pump gas in the car.
Wow. I didn't think about this, but how did the war affect the gas stations here?
That was before my day.
Right.
But they had gas rationing cards. And you just couldn't get all the gas you wanted. Now, if you were a farmer, it might have been there were exceptions made for farmers. And then there were black market rationing cards that my dad was offered some one time and he wouldn't take them.
Why not?
Well, it wasn't here, it was in Goochland. The guy offered him some, a relative, a marriage offered him some. And I'm sure I know he didn't take it.
So is the grandparents' generation the one that kind of predates the war? Are they more likely to walk Main Street?
No, they lived down the end of Fiddler's Green Road, so they wouldn't have walked anywhere.
Okay.
Now, of course, it wasn't nothing unusual for them to catch one of the boys and give them a dime or a nickel back then to go to town and get them a pack of cigarettes, and you better hustle back. I've heard my dad talk about that.
What? Define a boy for me.
Oh, teenager or younger.
Okay. So just a kid that you would know.
Well, my dad had a number, 2 sisters and a few brothers. And he'd catch hold of the first one and says, here, go get me a pack of cigarettes, and beat feet on back. They were, passed through the woods and the road.
Okay.
And I think there was a place just up 17 a while that sold cigarettes on the left. Just a little old black store.
A black store?
Yeah, that might have been the closest place they could go to get cigarettes.
And where would that have been? On 17 and what?
Just up 17 a little bit.
Okay, and you said it was a black-owned business?
Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Now, in the courthouse here, across from where you were digging, there was a florist back there. And on the other side of the street, there was a black dry cleaners and a barber shop. And then the black motel was in the back.
Do you remember the names of any of
Watkins.
those? Watkins.
I think it was Watkins.
Was the name of the motel?
Yeah, I think it was all owned by the same person.
Oh, really?
They sold a lot of flowers and corsage and stuff. And I know Mom patronized them some.
Huh.
And in later years, they actually put out-of-town crews with the fire company up in there. And they were clean places. I don't know why, but I had the opportunity to go down and examine them. And that was probably the only black dry cleaners or barber shop right here. They had some down the road now.
So what was their clientele like? Was it both white and black?
Probably mostly blacks.
That makes sense. So you wouldn't see a black-owned business on this part of Main Street?
Well, you didn't.
Yeah. Is that just the way it was, or can you identify a specific reason?
It's probably just the way it was. Now, when you go down past Page School, there was a beauty parlor and dry cleaners and Stokes' Tavern. And they were hopping, baby. They were hopping. And it was only a 2-lane road. And Papa's had to go down there and get them to move the cars. Because the parking lots were full and they were crowding the road. And my grandfather was called down there a couple of times when he was sheriff. And the last time he went down there, he asked Mr. Stokes, who's going to run this place? You or me? And the guy says, why? And Granddaddy told him, if I'm going to run it, I'm going to close her down. And I don't think the guy ever called him again.
Wow. Wow.
The funniest thing is he had a building out back, and when I was working for Dominion, I was reading meters there for a while, and you go around back, and he's going home in a bathrobe. And he says, I got me a shower out back. And he said, I can make the biggest mess out there I can. Wife won't fuss at me.
So your father and your grandfather were both men of the law. That's really an interesting, the idea that it's so crowded around these black businesses that you have to move people.
Well, there was nothing out there back then.
Right.
My great-great-grandfather was killed in the line of duty as a sheriff in, I think it was Tyler, Texas.
Wow.
He was shot. He rolled up to a house to arrest a horse thief, and they shot him to the window and killed him.
Wow. That's in Texas, you said?
Yeah.
Wow.
And great-grandmother and apparently the 2 daughters and 2 boys went to Fort Union to live with relatives. And the 2 boys ended up living down this way. And I think one lived with a Dr. Broadus. Now, I don't know how old the boys were when they got here, but they both ended up working in Saluda for the telephone telegraph company. Mm-hmm. And then Granddaddy started game warden and eventually was deputy down here.
Okay.
But you didn't have but one top sheriff and maybe one or maybe 2 deputies at the most back then.
Right.
Had to furnish your own car, your own gun.
That's pretty different from now.
Yeah.
So on Main Street, what kind of business does your dad run into?
He ran the dry cleaners and this old men's clothing.
Right, but as sheriff. I meant your granddad, I'm sorry.
Well, it was pretty much the same when he was sheriff.
Yeah.
Now, back in Granddaddy's day, court day used to be a big thing. They were horse and buggies lined up all the way down to the Catholic Church and everywhere you could think of it. People swapped lives and traded wares and sold horses and horse traded and all that back years and years ago. And then when Granddaddy was here, court day wasn't that big a thing.
Why not?
Well, everybody had radio and TV by then.
So what did your grandparents tell you about this place as they knew it?
Well, that's a good question. I used to ride around with him a little bit when he was sheriff, and he'd ride down a clay bank way out on this pier and talk on what looked like a telephone to somebody. Mm-hmm. Reception was good down there. But as far as talking to him, he used to stop at some of the old country stores and talk to somebody. Mm-hmm. He actually got locked into jail there in the Circle one time. And the, the clerk of court? B.B. Roan used to be clerk of court, I think that's what the name was. And Granddaddy saw him coming back from his house, that's where the lawyer's office is next to the church now, and asked him to come in here and get me out of jail. And he'd probably told him something, and 4-letter words that he could write in there as a joke. But he did let them out.
Uh-huh. So there was never really any trouble in this area.
Well, they were always going out to bootleggers and doing the usual.
Where do the bootleggers live?
Well, they would set up stills in different places. You know.
And he would just go bust them?
Yeah.
Snowball.
My granddaddy actually shot a guy one time. And he said the guy was running and he just kind of shot in his direction, and the guy quit and came on back, and when he put him up against the car to handcuff him, he noticed he was nicked in the side.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh,
Of course, I don't remember any of that.
Right.
But
Do you remember any of the bars or the watering holes, as Ronnie Stubblefield called them?
there was one right across the street there.
Uh-huh.
And in my day, it had actually had that, when I first saw it, it had outhouses behind it. And there was a building in the back that looked like the top of a Dutch windmill. And we asked our mother what it was, and she said it used to be a windmill. And I tried to get Billy DeHardy to research that when he was still capable. He's dead now. I'm running the Blowquips to try to do some research on it. And that's what I think my mother had told me. But watering holes. The courthouse restaurant sold beer in there. And unfortunately, they had a daughter that wasn't quite right, and she'd sit out in the car all day, and sometimes she'd get mad.
Oh my gosh.
But anyway, there was another, Pat Gwynn showed up on the curb there where the Mexican restaurant was. I can't tell you how old that was. And then further down the road where, say, Danny's Glass is, there was a place you could go in there and buy apparently a meal and beer. It's probably places I have left out.
Well, that's okay. Did you notice that as the number of cars in the county or in the state increased, more people were coming from outside of Gloucester to Gloucester? Maybe on the weekends or for fun?
Well, a lot of times we didn't come out.
Okay.
We stayed up there in the woods and played. But we had to come out when Mom went to the store because she wouldn't have left us at home back then. But we just weren't real knowledgeable. But it was a main hub. You had to go through Gloucester if you were going anywhere.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't leave for a weekend or anything with your family except for Richmond?
Well, we went to her home in Goochland, and we seemed to always go up and spend the night. And of course, Mom and Dad were married for 10 years without any children. And they used to walk down to the movies, and they used to walk through the woods to play golf, and they burned the roads up to Goochland too. And when Mom went up there for a week, Pop would write her letters. You don't think he'd pick up a phone and call her? That costs money. He'd write her a letter.
Wow. That's really something.
And we ran across letters that were up in the attic where he wrote home during the wall. And they censored all your mail. We never read the whole thing, but Mom would write, or he would, "My dearest darling," and I just couldn't bring myself to reading them, you know.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
he was in the Army for 3 years, I guess.
Absolutely. Wow.
World War II. He was a mess sergeant in the hospitals in England.
Wow.
See, he was being born in 1911. He had some age on him when they drafted him. And they drafted what's his name? A gray man that was a year older. And he got Louis Gray. And he got out of going in because his family farmed. But you know, when they get in the older people, they're scraping.
Yeah. Wow.
He got out some of the basic training. I don't think he had to do all the running and stuff in there. and they asked him, did he want to be a butcher or a baker? But he traveled across the country several times by train, and he got out. He went in Richmond to go around 295 on the right side. There's a whole complex of buildings that look different. That's where he went in, and he got out in Washington, Seattle, Washington, or somewhere out there, and had to come back. And they sent most of his money home to Mom as he was running the business for him, and she didn't need it.
Yeah.
But being married, they sent the money home.
Oops. That's really funny. We touched on it briefly, but I was wondering, within the context of Main Street specifically in the 50s and 60s, how did segregation work? Were there a lot of Black people that came down to do grocery shopping or that kind of thing, get gas, get their car fixed? Did your dad have Black patrons?
He had some Black patrons. Even who's a lawyer? What's the lawyer's name? Right
T.C.
here?
Walker?
T.C. Walker was a patient. I mean, a patient. He dealt with them.
Wow.
And we had a Black doctor by the name of Dr. Turner, and he had a Harvard accent. But he had some Black clientele.
Okay.
Now, probably most of them went to the Black dry cleaners. There was one in the courthouse and one at White Marsh. And I tell you the truth, I don't remember seeing that many in the grocery stores. I just don't remember seeing that many. I might be wrong, but they had somewhere else to shop, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it was a place where they wouldn't wait on them. I can't mention that about the restaurants because we never ate out much. But I'm sure they didn't go in. Sutton's up here. The one beside Tri-County was run by B.C. Sutton. And I'm just about sure they wouldn't go in there or any other places neat.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah. They just probably wouldn't wait on.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, it's the
And Sewell's,
time.
we did eat a couple of times at Sewell's Ordinary growing up. And Mom, of course, made us learn how to cut the chicken up with a knife and fork instead of picking it up and eating it. And she tried to instill table manners. And of course, when we went somewhere like that, we had to use them.
Yeah.
But we didn't eat out very much. Once in a blue moon, Pop liked to eat at home. That might speak highly of Mom and her cooking, though. You know. But of course, when they were courting and first married, they would eat out some going through West Point to get something to eat.
Really, West Point?
Yeah.
Wow. So when they're out together on Main Street and they're shopping, what are the different roles of men and women?
Pop didn't shop back then. Mom would shop.
So it's just women in grocery stores?
Yeah, now, if we needed bread or milk, of course, he would pick a loaf up. And they had Emma Jane's store was on the corner across from this side of the Gazette Journal.
Uh-huh.
And he knew her from the get-go, probably. And at Christmas time, he called, well, you wrap something up there for me to pick up. And Christmas Eve, he'd send me down there, because I always like to hang out with Pop. Go down there and pick a package up and bring it home. And if it didn't, wrong color, wrong size, Mom had no problem taking it back, which she shopped in there. So they had a pretty good idea what she wanted.
Wow.
But we had 2 or 3 department store-like things in the courthouse. And you had a great selection. You had Dawesville Dutton hardware store up there, which is just the other side of the produce market in the bigger building. Mm-hmm. And if you bought this bottle of water today and went in there next week, they'd have another one sitting there. It's not like Walmart. You buy that pair of glasses and next week you got to wait till next year to get another one. You had a couple of hardware stores. You had a Western Auto store. I don't know how they all stayed in business. The Western Auto sold
Absolutely.
guns and ammunition and stuff, and even Dawesville Dutton store sold stuff. And he had a freight depot he ran in the back. And I won't mention the store, but one of the stores went to West Point. His trucks went to West Point just about every day, and that's where the ABC store was. So they brought a certain amount of booze back into the county, and I'm sure they had regular customers that they sold it to, or bought it for them.
Wow.
And you know, there's so much that I have no clue about.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Do you have children, grandchildren?
Yeah, both.
What do you tell your children and your grandchildren about Gloucester? The Gloucester that they never knew that existed before they were born?
Well, mine live out of town, and I just relate different places and times and things that happen as I think about it going through town. But it was a much simpler, slower pace back then. And of course, the cars didn't have air conditioning, the houses didn't have air conditioning, and I would really miss that now.
That's right. What are your favorite anecdotes to tell them?
Well, there was a gentleman who's passed on a number of years ago, and was during the blackout during the war. He was staying in a building on the corner that's not there anymore. And he got out and was walking down the other side of Main Street, and he fell up the steps of the bank and got up, brushed himself off, and went ahead, fell down the steps on the other side. Now, you know what a blackout is during the war. And the story went that he got disoriented and ended up across the street at the hotel. And had to check in there for the night. And during the war, now I'm not using any names.
Right.
I don't know if I don't think he had any children, and he delivered butter and milk and eggs. And during the war, there was a shortage of men. And he picked up a nickname as Old Butter Dick. And when Mom was living in the upstairs apartment, there was a Lambeth Building Materials down the road. And they would cut and mill their own wood and had all the buildings for houses. And anyway, he would not come upstairs in the apartment alone with my mother while she described what she wanted him to build. And they built this beautiful cabinet with the teacups in the top and the grooves in the back to put the plates. But he would not go up there without a third person, because he didn't want the scuttlebutt regardless. I mean, and then the hotel over there were some sisters that ran it, and I understand they had some regular callers. There she is, hon.
Probably stitching.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Right. With some regular mail callers that came by there. And of course, the information was handed down to me, and I just assumed it to be the truth.
Well, there's that.
I paid attention to some of the things they told me.
Do you remember anything specific about the gas station, this one here?
Mr. Bilt's that hung on the wall, basically, because they had a big selection of Bilt's. And we talked about that earlier. And they had the long ones down to the short ones. They had one of the better selections in the county, I think. And I don't remember a whole lot else about it. No.
That's good enough for me.
The ones up in the courthouse there on the left Pop had a little grease can, and he'd send me to go out the back door and into there, ask somebody to fill it up with grease. I was a little kid, I was nervous, but we used to hang around the garages, and the people were nice. And the guy took the can and said he'd do it. He said, "How do you think I'm gonna get that grease in that can?" And he scooped it out of this big barrel and put it in the can and wiped his hand off, put the top on, and gave it back to me. Thank you. One other interesting thing, they had the stores on either one side of the road or the other. And if a truck made the last delivery here, they dumped the dry ice out behind the store. And you don't ever see that anymore. You can buy it. And the dry ice is good. If you park your car over here in the yard, have a tick infestation, get the dry ice and break it up and scatter it around, and they will. Wow. But don't touch it, they'll burn you. Freeze your hand to death.
Wow.
But you'd go play out back and you'd see the kind of steam rising off the little pieces that were left. And milk, they used to deliver the milk to the house. And the parents would open the bottle and had the cream that rose to the top. That was for the coffee. You weren't getting that.
That's wonderful.
And the coffee, they always had to grind 8 o'clock coffee. It smelled so good.
Making me hungry. Do you have anything to ask? No?
And of course, one of my earliest memories was the road by Phyllis Green Road was still dirt. And Pop would pull us down there on the sleigh and scoot us down the road when he went to get the paper. Because he had to walk all the way out to 17 to get the newspaper.
Wow. Wow.
And of course, you had boys that had the bicycle route in town here, and they'd ride the bicycle out and deliver the papers.
Wow.
Yeah. And the funniest thing, you had Morgan's drugstore on the left side of the street and Gray's drugstore on the right. You know, the buses came. If either one of them, especially the Morgan's drugstore, without a prescription, they'd call next door. And they'd send the boy out the back, go down the back street, go across the street, come up, and go in the back door, pick up the bottle, and trace the steps, and they'd put it in their own bottle and take it to the counter.
Wow.
And that was funny.
That is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to add?
I remember the airplanes pulling the banners back in the early years saying there was a circus in town.
Really?
I remember that. And you had to go to Southern States over here to buy the block ice. I remember that, to make the homemade ice cream. And of course, my grandfather had the milk cow, and they slapped the pigs and all, and made the best ice cream with the raw milk and the eggs, fresh eggs. Remember that.
Wow.
One thing that's interesting, most of your cars had real bumpers on them. And if your car cut off, you'd look around, motion somebody to come up behind you and push them. And it didn't bend your bumper up. Sometimes it'd rub a little and you might lose a little bit of chrome. But you could push the car a few feet, it'd start, and you'd wave and go on down the road.
Nice.
Yeah, nowadays you dare not touch another car. Bend it all to pieces, and you can't push them and start them anyway. But no air conditioning back then, and still had mosquitoes back then. Nickel candy bar was something. You could get a 5-cent root beer or 5-cent, like say, limeade. That was half a lime. Or 10 cent got you a whole lime and a big lemon limeade. They were so good. The fountain drinks were so good.
Which drugstore was that?
Mostly Morgan's is one we mostly patronized.
Okay.
Now my wife and them would go to Gray's drugstore on the other side of the street. And they all had the soda fountains in it. And the younger boys would get a job in there as a soda jerk. It was interesting.
Yeah.
And they did have the tent circuses back then. And, but to go to the old movie theaters and, can you imagine traveling through Richmond and places with no air conditioning in the car? I mean, you'd stop at a stoplight and think you're going to melt. You didn't know any better.
That's right.
Very few of the stores had them.
That's right. Dave's signaling at me from over there. So I'm going to shut this off real quick.
Please.